Well, the best way I think to start is if I could just invite you to introduce yourself to them, tell them a little bit about yourself and how you ended up in law school, and how you made that particular choice, a little bit about your background.
Let's see, I am a military brat. I was born in California, moved all over the place, and at the time I went to college, I ended up at Duke. I have a twin sister, and my dad was stationed in South Carolina at the time, and we couldn't figure out, it was a whole different world. It was the 70s, and you could pretty much do what you wanted in terms of where you wanted to go to school, or even law school at some point. It wasn't nearly as competitive as it is now. And I didn't know where I wanted to go to school. She decided on Duke, and I decided I'd go there too. So it was just that simple for college. And then for law school, my parents were out, and there's an Air Force base in Las Vegas, and my dad was stationed in Las Vegas. And as tempting as it was to sort of hang out in Las Vegas, in the 70s, Las Vegas was even more bizarre than it is today. And I spent a couple of summers out there working. There was really not a whole lot going on in terms of jobs for educated people. It was one of those places where if you wanted to serve cocktails, there were plenty of jobs for you to do that kind of thing. But if you had a college degree, there was less opportunity there than you might imagine. I thought about being a teacher. I thought about being a journalist. And truly senior year, one of the deans at the Arts and Sciences School at Duke came to me and said, there's this great scholarship available if you want to go to law school. And Vanderbilt was offering these scholarships, and I happened to get one of them. And frankly, it was just that sort of serendipitous that I ended up in law school. I can't say that it's always something I dreamed of. I talk to people now who are like, I've dreamed ever since I was a child of being a lawyer. It's like, why? What did you think that lawyers did that this was something that a child would want to do? But happily, the opportunity came to me. I went to law school not with much more of a plan than that. Unlike today, it was the kind of thing you could do because there was more money available then to go to law school. It was less expensive and less competitive for getting in. But once I got there, I really, really, I have to say, even enjoyed law school. It was not one of those sort of cutthroat paper chase kind of competitive places back then. And I was interested in the things that I was learning, but also just realized that lawyers have a lot of opportunity to do a variety of things, and that there were lots of different things that I might be interested in doing as a lawyer, and that training was going to give me more opportunity than any of the other things that I thought about.
You and I went to law school at just about the same time, and we went to very similar law schools.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you've said in the past that the expectation at Vanderbilt was that all of your classmates and you would go off to big firms and do that whole thing, which I did, and you didn't. Could you talk a little bit about how you were able to buck that trend? Because you certainly could have, and you chose not to.
I went to work for Atlanta Legal Aid Society straight out of law school, and I worked there for 6 years. I guess it was sort of that post-hippie, I don't know. It was a different time, as you know, and it really was. Those of us who sort of came of age in the 70s always felt like we'd missed something really big and important by missing the 60s, I think. And so I don't know. My family is all sort of social worker, save the world types, and I think I am too to a certain extent. And I decided while I was in law school that the whole firm life did not appeal to me, and frankly probably was something I would not be good at, because I am just enough of a nonconformist that I probably wouldn't do well with the expectations in terms of the hours that you were expected to work and the kind of work that you'd be doing. And that what appealed to me a little bit more was probably the social work kind of law practice that I've ended up doing, where I could combine my interest in sort of helping people and getting to know what underlies the problems that people are having, because I don't know if it's just that I'm nosy or if I really am sort of a social worker at heart, but I do like to figure out why people are in the situations that they're in, and see if you can fix that problem as a part of trying to fix whatever it is that's their more immediate legal problem. And so and then I've also, I sort of make fun of people who were born knowing that they want to be lawyers or judges or whatever, but particularly within the Black community in America, I think there's this whole sort of putting the legal profession up on a pedestal because of the role that lawyers play in the civil rights movement. And of course I was aware of that as a child and growing up, but I'd never really known any lawyers. But there was a part of me that said, if I can be a part of that and do something good with a law degree, then, why wouldn't I? And I was lucky enough to come out of school not owing any debt for college or law school. And so the financial pressure that probably a lot of people in this room and recent law graduates face, I did not have. I could do what I wanted to do. And the fact that my first job out of law school paid $13,000 a year meant that I was living like a college student, but I didn't have the debt that I think a lot of people now have. That means that they don't have the freedom to make the choices and do less well-paying job that might be more interesting to them.
But you still remember what the starting salary was.
I do. I'm not bitter about it at all. Huh? But I said this, I think, the last time you talked to me, and I just need to quit doing it since you post these on YouTube. But my best friend in law school got a job on Wall Street, a firm called Cadwalader, Wickersham and Taft, making $64,000 a year, which was more money than I could ever imagine. And it was the contrast, I think, between her making 64 and me making 13.7 or something like that. That was just ridiculous to me, and did, I think, embitter me somewhat. But I did fine. We had a great time. I had to have a roommate to make ends meet and all of that. But I was doing work that I really enjoyed, that I thought was important.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, we've had in Tamika Daniel from Georgia Legal Services here in Macon to talk about what she does, and she's done this for 12 years, and you spent the first part of your career at Atlanta Legal Aid. Tell us about your clients and the kinds of things that you handled, and what you liked about it, and if there was anything you didn't like about it other than the salary.
I liked that I could take on as much responsibility as I wanted very quickly. I mean, they had me in court the week I got sworn into the bar. I did a lot of housing, and in Atlanta, with the Atlanta Housing Authority, frankly, and constant rounds of evictions of public housing tenants, there is a special housing court in Fulton County, and we used to call it night court because it starts 4 o'clock on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and so we always had clients who were in the middle of some sort of eviction case, and most of the time we were able to work things out, but sometimes we had to have trials, and it got to be very comfortable. I mean, we knew there was the same judge for all the cases, usually the same cast of characters in terms of who was on the other side, if it was a housing authority case or generally subsidized housing. There were a couple of lawyers in town who represent most of the subsidized housing projects. And so, you could get people in and hear their story, and as I said, try to fix the underlying problem, because if you didn't, with something like a housing case, then they're going to be right back next month unable to pay the rent. And so what you really want to know is, why didn't you pay the rent? and what happened to the money? And a lot of times you're able to sort of go in and do a more social worker, holistic kind of problem solving for people than you are with other kinds of law. So most of my clients were women. They were all poor. Atlanta Legal Aid represents poor people. They usually had children. They usually had fallen behind on rent because of some other unexpected expense, or frankly, more commonly, because of being put in a weird position by either a friend or a boyfriend or a child or a grandchild who had done something that got the client into trouble. And so a lot of times we were able to truly solve problems in a way that I felt like I was helping people. I did some divorces. I think everybody should have a stint doing divorce cases every now and then. They're actually kind of fun, because sometimes you do feel like you're curing a real problem for somebody. but they're also a good way to get into court and tell a story to a judge and help somebody most of the time. And then I did some benefits work, public benefits work for people who've been denied food stamps or some other public benefit, Social Security. And those were also cases where on a fairly quick timeline you got to go in, do a hearing, try to fix a problem, and get somebody back on track with their lives.
You know, you talk about trying to get to the root of the problem with your clients, and that obviously is a vision of being a lawyer that is broader than just knowing cases and knowing how to argue and showing up at the time of it. Is that broader vision of what the lawyer's proper role is that something that is unique to, in your view, to representing folks through legal aid, or is this something that all lawyers should be thinking about and seeing themselves as more than technicians?
I think it's something that all lawyers should think about. Unfortunately, it's not always what the client wants to hear. People don't necessarily come to you to solve their life problems. And so for me, it's difficult sometimes to sort of let that piece of it go and say, all right, you know, you came to me for this one little thing and I will do this thing. We both know there's a bigger problem here. And until you deal with that problem, you're going to continue to have problems over here. And I can give examples of that. You know, the same thing with the paying the rent sort of a problem. If you've got a teenage son who's stealing your money because he has a drug habit, and we get you the money this month and pay it and get this eviction case dismissed, but you haven't dealt with the fact that this person is still over here looking for you to get $1 so he can take it from you, then you're just going to continue to have this other legal problem because you're not going to have the rent next month. And you know, I see it now in the disciplinary cases that I do with lawyers who, I mean, the addict kind of situation is a good situation to point at, where you can deal with a grievance that's been filed against you this time, but until you deal with the thing that caused the grievance, you know, your financial problems or your addiction problems or your depression or whatever it is, you're not going to get things right with your practice in a way that is long-lasting.
When you were at legal aid, did you ever have clients push back when you tried to expand the definition of the problem?
Yeah, and like I said, I do think ultimately part of what you learn in law school is it's none of my business, really. I mean, if you're doing law the traditional kind of a way, then you can put on binoculars or whatever and just focus in on exactly what the legal problem is and fix that and send people on their merry way. And people sometimes aren't ready to deal with whatever the underlying problem is, or don't think it's any of your business, or whatever, and then you just do what you do as a lawyer and let it go. I mean, I actually think I'm pretty good at that. I think there's a part of me that wants to fix everything, but frankly, many times that's not what the client wants. And frankly, right now, representing the State Bar of Georgia, I've got a pretty strong-willed group of bosses, all of whom are lawyers, all of whom think they know as well as I do what the problem is. And they might disagree with me completely on what the problem is, but they think they know. And they don't necessarily want my advice about what to do in the long term. They want me to do this thing, and then I do that thing and go home and sleep at night. So it's nothing that I try not to stress over it. I try not to substitute my judgment for the client's judgment, but where I see a broader underlying problem to the legal problem, I can't, you know, I do try to point it out and make suggestions. If it's not welcome, I just try to back off.
Did you ever sense that people, when you were practicing for Atlanta Legal Aid, treated you differently because you represented poor people?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even the clients, we had clients every now and then who would come in and say, well, I'm going to go get a real lawyer. You know, if you're free, you're no good, I guess, is the theory. But, so, you know, people sometimes don't value things that are free. And because they did not have to pay us at all, and because a lot of times, I guess, we seemed younger and more diverse, frankly, than what people are accustomed to having a lawyer look like, certainly back then. I don't know if they thought we were just playing around at being lawyers or what? I mean, but we had that all the time. And the legal community, I have to say the legal community in Atlanta has always been very welcoming of the Atlanta Legal Aid Society and very respectful of the lawyers there. So we never had any mistreatment at the hands of the bar at large. But individual lawyers every now and then would sort of underestimate us just because, we didn't dress like other lawyers, we didn't look like other lawyers, or they knew that we made $13,000 a year when they made 20 times that, or whatever. But that still happens. I mean, that happens to people because of how they look. That happens to women routinely. That happens to young people all the time. You'll be underestimated, or lawyers who believe that they can get away with it sometimes will try to treat you in a way that demeans or belittles you just because they either don't think you're as smart as they are or they can get away with it somehow. And, that's sort of part of the hazing ritual known as becoming a lawyer as far as I'm concerned.
Well, did you ever feel like you were treated differently because you were a woman and because you're African American? I mean, you're talking about legal aid lawyers looking different.
Yeah.
I mean, did you sense that from the judges or from the other lawyers?
All the time. I mean, that still happens. Yeah, America is America, and bullies are bullies. And one of the things I think they teach you in law school is how to be arrogant, frankly. And so, you will run into lawyers all the time who think that they can intimidate you with things like that. I've had judges, I do cases all over the state, and particularly when I was younger, you'd get into court and they'd call a case. I used to have to do fee arbitration enforcement. So a lawyer loses a fee arbitration claim, is ordered to pay the client a refund, doesn't pay it, the bar has to sue them. So we sue lawyers, you have to sue them in the county where you live. And so I'd have to do cases all over the state of Georgia in smaller towns where they haven't seen a black woman lawyer before, in the 80s anyway. And so they call this case State Bar of Georgia versus so-and-so, and I stand up. And they're like, well, who are you? Are you a lawyer? Yes, I am. And in fact, I represent you, the State Bar of Georgia. You just have to educate people. I've never really, part of it I think is being a military brat and sort of being the new girl every other year in some school somewhere in the country. And so I think that I learned very early on how to deal with that. And frankly, people mostly end up respecting you if you know what you're doing and know what you're talking about, and don't let them stress you about it, frankly. I do see it as a hazing ritual. That it's like pledging sorority or whatever. It's the same stuff. And so people are going to try and see if they can get away with treating you a certain way or pretending like they think you're stupid or whatever, and you can either let them get away with it or not. And I have found, frankly, everybody in the state knows me now and nobody treats me like that anymore. But that's not to say that folks haven't tried all my life. So, I think it's the same for most people in one way or another. Everybody kind of goes through that on some level, and it's just a matter of not letting it get to you, I guess.
Yeah, what you describe accurately as bullying in the research is described as strategic incivility.
Strategic incivility, that's bullying.
Yeah, exactly what it is. And all the studies show that the most frequent targets are young lawyers, women, and minority lawyers.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, and I think you see it coming. I think all you can really do about it is know what you are doing and prepare. Because there's nothing worse than, the times that I feel insecure are the times when I know. I'm back at legal aid, I'd feel insecure when I knew I didn't have a case. Most of my cases, I think I won like 4 cases in 6 years. And I had cases twice a week all the time. They were losing cases, and I knew that going in. And so the only preparation I could do is to figure out whether, it's like criminal defense work, whether the other side has done the things that they need to do under the law to evict my client. You have to provide proper notice and all these different things where you could screw it up. And so my case is more about making sure you've proved your case than it was about asserting any real affirmative defenses, because most of the time I didn't have any defenses. Yeah, she hadn't paid the rent, she doesn't have the money, what can we do? So So being prepared, I think, is the best defense for the possibility that you're going to be mistreated by somebody else when you get to court.
Right, making sure you don't get distracted, because that's part of the point. Right?
Yeah, that's the whole point. And just sort of, calling people on stuff. I've had grown men cry when I told them that they were being a bully. And they're shocked. Yes, you're being a bully. We're not going to have, lawyers who I'm disciplining who come in and think that the tactic is to somehow browbeat me or be offended by what I'm doing or whatever. And you call them on it, and they're stunned that you think they're, it's a bad word now. People don't want to be a bully. But, that's another way of dealing with it. Just tell them you know what it is and you're not going to fall for it.
Yeah. Let's talk about your current job and the jobs in the state bar that led up to that. I mean, you were disciplinary counsel for a long time, and now general counsel for the, for the big bar, as we say. What do you do all day?
It seems like all I ever do is talk. I write a lot now, but I used to try cases. I used to try disciplinary cases. I went to the bar in 1988 as an assistant general counsel, and all I did was disciplinary cases against lawyers who are accused of violating the ethics rules. And I became deputy general counsel probably 5 or 6 years later, and added some administrative responsibilities to that. So I had to do things like budget, more supervision, and more sort of administration in terms of the office staff, supervising the office staff. I don't like those things as much, but of course, as you progress in your career, that's sort of what you have to take on. And now as general counsel, because we're a mandatory bar organization, we've got 80 employees and there are 45,000 lawyers in the state. The disciplinary part of the job is about 50%, or maybe even less than 50% of the job now is sort of serving as the head of the disciplinary office, but I've got a great deputy general counsel who really does all the work over there. And then for representing the bar is involved in everything from negotiating contracts about our meetings to representing the bar when we get sued, and we get sued all the time by people who are mad at us for one thing or another. We do the unlicensed practice of law, and we do rules changes. I have to do employment stuff related to the employees of the office. And then it's in-house counsel work for the most part, representing this entity that is very active in a lot of different places and that wants to be more active than it is, than it's able to be sometimes. For instance, with politics, because we're a mandatory bar, we're not supposed to spend dues money on politics. So we have a legislative fund, and we do lobbying with the legislative fund, and with the legislature in session, I spend a lot of time looking at bills that are going through the legislature, and figuring out the impact of those bills on the organization or on practicing law.
So you're practicing law, you just have one client.
Yeah, I have one client, a very busy client, and a client because the client is lawyers who knows as much about what I'm doing as I do, which is a challenge sometimes.
Or they think they do.
I think they do, exactly. A real challenge.
Let's talk about the disciplinary side a little bit, because I know you have been deeply involved in that
Yeah, I love it.
A long time. First, let's give the students a sense of the scale of complaints about lawyers in Georgia. In a given year, what is the bar hearing and seeing, and then we'll talk about what leads to it. But just let's talk about scale. 45,000 lawyers.
45,000 lawyers. There is a consumer assistance program that is the office where if somebody just calls and said, I've got a complaint about a lawyer, this is the place where those calls all go. And they get something like 40 to 60 calls a day about lawyers. So people are mad at lawyers all the time is what I say. And consumer assistance has 2 lawyers and 3 paralegals, and they take all these calls. So somebody just calls up and says, I have a problem with a lawyer. Most of the time, the problem is that stereotypical lawyer won't return my phone calls. and they are able to work things out. So whatever the math is on a minimum of 40 calls a day is how many inquiries we get. If consumer assistance isn't able to work the problem out, they will send the person a grievance form for the person to file a grievance against the lawyer. And we get about 10 new grievances in the general counsel's office every day. So, every work day anyway.
Let's go back to consumer assistance for just a minute. A lot of them get worked out there, and thank goodness, right?
Yeah,
Because
thank goodness.
It lessens the burden on the bar and everybody.
Mhm.
But typically, they would work that out by calling the lawyer
Yeah.
and saying, call your client back?
Yeah, that's what they do. They will hear from the client, figure out what the problem is. A lot of times they just give the client advice about what to do themselves. If the client wants to fire their lawyer and doesn't know how, they'll tell them how to do that. But frankly, the most common question they get is, I don't know what's going on with my case, my lawyer won't return my phone calls, what do I do? Consumer assistance staff will call the lawyer, tell the lawyer the client's having a problem with them, and try to get the two back together to fix the relationship. Of course, about a third of the time, consumer assistance can't get the lawyer to answer the phone call either. And so that might indicate something like abandonment, which becomes a problem under the rules of professional conduct. So not returning a phone call or an email or whatever every now and then isn't an ethics issue, but making a pattern of it so that it becomes abandonment or disregard of a legal matter is a violation of the rules in Georgia, and that's when they send the calls to us. Out of the calls that they get every day, truly 2/3, 3/4 of them, they're able to deal with, and my office never gets a grievance on those situations.
Gosh, you'd think a lawyer that got a phone call from the state bar would return
Would
that call.
return it, one would think, but no, that does not happen
Not
all
always.
the time.
No, no.
Doesn't happen all the time.
All right, so in this subset of complaints, you're getting these 8 to 10 grievances a day. Walk us through what happens next.
Consumer assistance, you can telephone. If you're going to file a grievance, it has to be in writing, has to be on a form that we've got. And so we send these forms out and get them back in the mail, like I said, about 10 every day. And it's just, the form just says something like, say what the lawyer has or hasn't done that causes you to be unhappy with him or her. And people just pour their hearts out. So there's a form, but people attach 15, 20 pages to the form and explain what's going on with their case. A lot of people are just unhappy because the outcome of their case wasn't good. They lost. And maybe it's that the lawyer hasn't done anything wrong, but they lost the case. A lot of them haven't heard from their lawyer and don't know what's going on with their case. More serious situations, they think the case is settled, but the lawyer hasn't sent them their money, or the lawyer sent them their money and the lawyer's check bounced, or, it can be anything. It can be anything. Anybody can file a grievance against a lawyer, including the person on the other side. So a lot of times, I think the areas of practice where we hear from people the most are criminal, because people who are in prison are not happy, and a lot of times they do think that something their lawyer did is the reason that they lost the case. It's never, oh, did you commit the crime? Maybe, but I wouldn't be in jail right now if the lawyer had just asked this one question on cross-examination. And so, they'll go through the whole trial and how the lawyer didn't do what the lawyer was supposed to do. And that's the reason that they're there. So criminal law, domestic relations, there's lots going on with divorce cases, like custody issues. So if you lose a divorce case, you lose custody of your children or something like that, you're not happy. And one of the things that people do when they aren't happy is file a grievance against their lawyer. And then the third, these probably account for 80% of the grievances that we get, but the third area is just general personal injury type work, where you've been injured in a car accident, you've hired a lawyer, and usually with those cases it's that either that things aren't moving quickly enough or that the settlement amount isn't what you had hoped it would be. And so you've got questions about whether the lawyer did what he or she was supposed to do in that case. So that's mostly what we see in the grievance process.
All right, so the grievance comes in.
I was walking you through the process.
No. Well, I mean, that's good to have a feel for the kinds
Yeah.
of things that give rise to grievances. and they're going to be reviewed internally.
That's right. We've got a grievance counsel, one lawyer, who works with two, really an investigator and a paralegal, and reviews those grievances when they come in every day. 90% of the time, we're going to ask the lawyer to respond to the grievance, because if there's anything in there that, if true, would be a violation of the rules of professional conduct, we have an obligation to investigate. So we're not able to tell from the face of the thing whether what's there is true or not. We have to do an investigation to tell that. But we have to investigate if something in the grievance, assuming it's true, if something in there would violate the rules. And almost everybody is going to allege something that's a violation of the rules, an unreturned phone call or a failure to account for something or whatever. So we send a letter to the lawyer along with the grievance, and the lawyer has 14 days to send us a response back, telling us basically their side of the story, what happened here. They send back a letter. Typically, we kind of review the letters, but we're going to allow the complaining party to rebut anyway, so it's rare for a grievance to get dismissed at that point. We pretty typically would send the response out to the person who filed the grievance and say, here's the response we got, do you have anything to add? Let that person add whatever they want, and that's the point when a lawyer in the office sits down with a stack of grievances and reads the grievance, the response, and the rebuttal, and decides whether there's really a problem there. Most of the time, that informal writing back and forth has resulted in enough information that, frankly, we can close the thing, because we can tell what's really happened, and that there's not a violation of the rules. There's probably some problem with communication or some failure to communicate that doesn't amount to a violation of the rules, and you can just sort of close the file and say, keep this person updated on what's going on with their case. But in about 15 or 20% of situations, there's some unanswered questions, or the lawyer hasn't responded, or it looks like there's a problem there. And so for those cases, we send the file to the disciplinary board. Georgia's disciplinary board is made up of volunteer lawyers and members of the public, and half are appointed by the Supreme Court, half are appointed by the state bar president. They are like a grand jury for disciplinary cases. So individual lawyer members of the disciplinary board are assigned files. They have subpoena power. They can subpoena the bank records if it's a question about what happened to somebody's money. They can subpoena the client file. They can make phone calls and investigate however they want, and they meet every month. At their monthly meetings, they sit down, and every member who has cases that are ready to present just tells the story. Here's what happened. And the group, like a grand jury, just makes a decision about whether there's probable cause to believe that there's a rules violation involved. Where there's probable cause, they make a finding of probable cause and send the file back to my office for us to prosecute the lawyer. So we would assign the file to one of the 6 lawyers who do disciplinary cases in the office. They've got 30 days to file the case. The cases all get filed in the Supreme Court, because that's the group that gives you your license. That's the group that can take your license away. So file the cases in the Supreme Court. Most of them get resolved like any other kind of civil case. We can do discovery, and we have hearings before hearing officers who the Supreme Court appoints. The hearing officer makes a recommendation about whether the lawyer should be disciplined if the hearing officer finds a violation. And they can be reprimanded, suspended from practice, or disbarred based on whatever it is that's gone on. So in any given year, there are about 200 lawyers who are disciplined, about 25 or 30 who get disbarred, about 25 or 30 who get suspended from practice for anything from like 6 months to 5 years, and then the rest get some level of reprimand. And that's it in a nutshell.
It is. And let's talk about the serious cases of discipline. So we're talking about suspensions and disbarments.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody goes to law school and undergoes what these students are undergoing, both intellectually and financially and the rest of it. Nobody does this in order to get disbarred or suspended.
Right.
And yet we have lawyers every year that end up there. What happens in between? How does a lawyer arrive at that place typically?
I think a lot of it, and this is once again where I start sounding like a social worker, I think a lot of it is from unresolved issues that frankly could have been dealt with as early as law school. You're walking a fine line as a law student if you admit that you've got mental health issues, if you admit that you've got addiction problems, because you've got to get through the fitness part of the bar admissions process to even sit for the exam and become admitted. But we deal with people who have addiction issues, and they've had them going back as far as they can remember, and didn't want to admit it to bar admissions, didn't want to deal with it because they thought it would become an impediment to their being able to sit for the bar. So from what I can tell, and I spend a lot of time trying to figure this out, most of the people who we are dealing with do have something going on that underlies, people aren't just, you're right, nobody goes to school this long and works this hard to get disbarred, I hope. But we deal with people who either are suffering from depression or who have some sort of addiction problem, probably more than half the time. And depression, I think, is as bad a problem for the profession as the addiction problems. And what that means is that maybe a quarter of the disciplinary cases, that might be high, I don't know, but maybe a quarter of the disciplinary cases that we get end up being defaults, where from the time we send the lawyer the grievance and say, what's your side of the story, very informally, to me very unthreateningly, to the time we have a hearing before a hearing officer appointed by the court, we file charges against you in the court, we never hear a word from the lawyer. Not one word. Default from start to finish. You're going to get disbarred if you default from start to finish. And yet, it happens all the time, and I think it happens because of either depression issues, some sort of mental health issues, or addiction problems where the people just walk away from practice.
My reading of these cases, it seems to me that the three most common things that lead to serious discipline: stealing client money, of course, serial abandonment, right, and then conviction of a felony. None of those are hard to prove, but am I reading it right? Those are sort of the three roads to perdition.
Those are the three roads to perdition, and many, many times, for all three of those kinds of problems, the underlying problem is addiction or depression. So, I'm always, anybody who steals money is going to get disbarred. That's pretty much automatic. You've got this thing called an escrow account. I can subpoena the bank records. If you've got personal checks, my personal favorite was a guy whose escrow account had nothing but checks to some liquor store and something called Flips, which turned out to be his, local bar that would take his personal check or whatever. And okay, he's got a negative balance in escrow, and here's who all the checks were written to. They're supposed to be not for your own personal benefit, just for clients.
Not your money.
Not your money. Easy to prove. But what you've also proven there is that there was a problem that underlied why you started to steal. And a lot of times, that's what we see, is that people aren't just stealing to buy stuff with the money. They're stealing to support a habit or some sort of, gambling problem or buy drugs or, something like that. And I think there's a real difference in how you're treated by the Supreme Court if you sort of admit that you've got a problem and you're trying to deal with it versus, well, obviously not saying anything or even just sort of being in denial about the underlying causes of whatever it is.
Now, you've mentioned depression several times, and from my reading, nobody knows what quote-unquote causes depression, but we do know that one of the things strongly associated with it is chronic stress. And that lawyers have a higher rate of depression than other professions. Where is that coming from? Why is it that lawyers would suffer from that malady so much more? Do you have images in your mind of kind of lawyers that you're talking about and what led to the mental health problem?
Yeah, and completely unscientifically.
Right, well, mine too. Completely
unscientifically. I do think it's stress. I think that a lot of us are overachievers and have been all our lives. I think a lot of people end up becoming lawyers because they've done well in school. People have high expectations for them. They have high expectations for themselves. And they get out of school and sometimes things aren't as easy as they thought they might be, or they become overwhelmed with problems like debt issues, or, frankly, sometimes people just get burnt out on what they're doing and need to start doing something different, but either can't afford to or they're afraid to or whatever. And they just sort of get sloppy about it or stop caring about it. Because we don't typically discipline new lawyers or young lawyers. We typically discipline people who've practiced for 12, 15 years. And frankly, they're typically small firm solo practitioners who don't have a big support network around them, who don't have a financial cushion, who either needing money take on some things that they probably wouldn't have taken on without the financial pressure, and sort of find themselves with a bunch of horrible cases, possibly a bunch of horrible clients. I mean, sometimes you end up with clients who can definitely drive you to drink, I think, and they just sort of stick their heads in the sand and don't come up for air, don't respond to anything, start missing court. Some of the more prominent lawyers who've ended up in the disciplinary system start looking back on where they went wrong and just say, we were living large, living the high life, doing really well. Then the economy tanked and business went south, and we started drinking in the office. That is the story that one guy tells. They had gone from drinking in the office to celebrate a big victory every now and then when they had a great success in court, to just drinking in the office because they were depressed. And the next thing you know, all they're doing is drinking. And this guy got turned in by security staff at the courthouse who thought he was drunk when he went to court and told the judge. And so the judge has somebody bring in a DUI kit and test him, and he's drunk in court. But truly a good, somebody I end up now, sadly, with a lot of people being prosecuted who I know from practicing law in just around this state forever. And just a good, smart guy, good lawyer, but something happened at some point. So I don't know what it is. I think that this profession can take a heavy toll on people. I think a lot of it is the expectations that we've let build up around the profession in terms of the hours that you're expected to work. And, after a while, that has to wear you down. And, we were talking about the big firm thing earlier. There was nothing attractive about working 80 hours a week as far as I'm concerned, and I don't understand how we sort of let the profession become something where that's expected of people. I don't think that's right. So,
what would you say to folks as a caution? I mean, how do you avoid these kinds of issues?
A couple of things. I always say have friends who aren't lawyers. Have some friends who aren't lawyers. Keep those people around you. And I have to say, most of my friends are lawyers. I have too much family, and so I've got that sounding board or grounding mechanism in my life. And I think for those of you who are married with kids or have a close family or long-term friends or something like that, it'll be harder for you to get sucked up and consumed by getting out of school and focusing on career. I think you've got to focus on career, but it should not be your entire life. You've got to have other things that you're interested in. You've got to have other people that remind you that there are other things going on in life. And, from the first time I went home for Christmas break after law school, and my family announced that I was even more annoying and arrogant and, such a know-it-all. Is that what they're teaching you in law school? And you sort of step back and go, yeah, that's what they're teaching me in law school. But thankfully, I have you people to keep me humble. I mean, your family will keep you humble, and your good friends will keep you humble, and people will sort of keep you from becoming the obnoxious lawyer who is consumed by practice and thinks that that's all that there is to life. So, it's hard, because I do think school has you thinking that that's all there is to life. When you start dealing with the placement office and trying to find jobs, they will have you thinking that you're a failure if you aren't making 6 figures immediately out of law school. And it's not true. You can find things to do that you will enjoy doing that may not pay you very much, that may mean that you have to have a roommate for the first few years out of law school or whatever, but that quite often are interesting and will teach you things that you need to know that lawyers in the big firms aren't going to get. That will sort of make you know a more well-rounded group of people, and I think will stand you in good stead career-wise over, a longer period of time than the big firm resume thing will do. So that's it. I mean, I've got a lot of things I like to do. I've always been interested in a variety of things. You got to have hobbies. You got to have stuff you do for fun. You got to take a break every now and then. I try to force the people in my office to go on vacation, at least a week at a time. You can't work all the time and not have that take some toll on you. That's usually not a positive toll, frankly.
Well, as you know, since you've been kind enough to do this a number of times, I usually end with that question before I turn it over to the students, and so I appreciate you giving them that advice and that bit of wisdom. Let me turn it to the students for a few minutes and see what questions they may have of you. What questions do we have for Ms. Frederick on a Monday morning?
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
I have a
Yes, sir.
question. Big surprise, right?
The guy on the front row who always has a question.
That's right.
Never seen that in law school.
I know. It's because I'm so arrogant. Right. You talked a lot about mental illness, depression, addiction, things that have been documented in the medical world as illnesses, as diseases, things that have had a terrible stigma for a long time, but now slowly are being perceived as something as natural, I guess, as cancer, for example, or heart disease. What is the Georgia Bar's responsibility in nipping that in the bud, in addressing that, instead of just waiting for these disciplinary issues to come to the fray? Is there anything that the Georgia Bar should be doing actively in law schools besides having a mental health center on campuses that sometimes are accessible, sometimes aren't, sometimes have counseling available? Is there something more active that needs to be done, since this is so pervasive in a higher degree in our profession?
Well, it's funny because the traditional answer would be nope. Everybody's sort of on their own. I think that we're walking a fine line, because the bar admissions people are going to want to know if you've ever been in mental health counseling, or if you've ever been treated for any addiction problem. And they're going to ask you more questions when you say yes than they would if you said no. It's not going to be, okay, I'm certified as fit to sit for the bar. They're going to want to know details, and they're going to, at some point, make an evaluation about whether your background means that you are not fit to hold client funds or to be a lawyer. And so I think there's been this level of suspicion among students about things like a counseling office on campus. And I think there would be that about the state bar trying to get involved with, oh, you look like you need mental health counseling, go ahead and go. So there's a balancing act that has to be performed there. The Americans with Disabilities Act now is the basis for a lot of claims by law students who aren't being certified as fit because of their background of whatever kind of treatment that they've had. They're filing claims against bar admissions authorities saying, you, State Bar of Georgia, shouldn't even ask me these questions. And so I don't know where all that's going to end up. My office does not handle bar admissions. But that's the first problem. I think the question about what the State Bar of Georgia should be doing, you know, we've got programs in law schools that deal with professionalism issues. We do orientations. I would imagine that there's one here that the bar sort of sponsors through our professionalism program to talk to you about professional conduct in lawyers. But as a bottom line, you know, I don't know what we should be doing. We're not therapists. I have a lot of ideas about all this stuff, but maybe we should get some mental health professionals in and have them talk to students about you know, the stresses and the issues and all of that, because I do think most of it is learning how to deal with stress and just sort of learning how to manage it from now through, you know, your entire career. And I don't know that the bar really has taken any role in that at the law school level. We have a lawyer assistance program or impairment program, I can't remember what it's called. It's either lawyer assistance or lawyer impairment. That is basically a counseling, peer counseling kind of a program for lawyers who have addiction or mental illness kinds of problems, to have a number to call and talk to somebody. But that's as much as we've done. And I'm a little bit torn about whether it's something we ought to do, frankly. Like I said, I think it's better done by professionals, but maybe we could provide the professionals to do it. I don't know. Good question.
Yes, ma'am.
I think probably almost everybody listening to this lecture has been touched in their life by an addiction issue or a mental health issue, not necessarily in their own life, but with somebody they know,
Yeah.
a relative. It's as Fabiani said, there's less of a stigma, or you said it, there's less of a stigma attached than there used to be, and many people are recognizing that these are chemical imbalances or diseases, and they're systemic. You know, if a person's depressed, it's not necessarily just their brain chemistry, it's throughout their system. There's even been studies that show that tooth decay can lead to depression. Anyway, that's off topic, but the administration at Mercer deals with these issues in a very professional, excellent manner. However, that doesn't always transfer to how individual legal professors deal with the situation. And I'm certainly not referring to you, Professor Longan. But, I mean, is there a recourse for a student to file a complaint? Or to say that this professor is being insensitive, this professor has said offensive things?
I do not know. I don't know at all. I think the only exposure that I've had to that kind of thing has been through something like the ADA, where people are bringing claims under the Americans with Disabilities Act for saying that they require accommodation based on certain things, and I would think that that might be the kind of thing that would help in the situation that you're talking about. You know, the fine line, I'm a prosecutor as a bottom line. I mean, I prosecute lawyers. And for me, the fine line in having these kinds of discussions is, I can't accommodate you if your problem means that you're going to steal money out of your escrow account. There's no accommodation for that. Or if whatever it is means that you're going to ignore clients for months at a time because you've been off your meds or whatever. And so, you know, as harsh as that may sound, you got to realize that when you're a lawyer and you're a fiduciary and people's lives are in your hands, basically, that there's a line between accommodating an illness and causing harm to the public or causing harm to clients. And that's the tension that's there. And that's the reason these ADA claims are really novel for the legal profession, because, we've always been, frankly, heartless, looking just at the legal issue. I'm the social worker. Not many people look at it like I do and want to know the underlying problem. If the outcome is that this client has been harmed, then you're going to be disciplined. And yeah, the problem might be something that's pretty sympathetic, but that's the tension. That's the tension. We're only now, because these things are becoming more out in the open and there is less stigma, and there are legal rights associated now with being accommodated with whatever the issue is, we're starting to look at it a little bit differently, but frankly, we're coming very slowly to that within the legal profession and the disciplinary process, because whatever's going on with you, if this person's been harmed, then that probably means there's a violation of the rules of professional conduct.
Yeah, in the end, it's not about the lawyer, it's about the public.
Yeah, so I talk a lot about those aspects of it, but I end up prosecuting lawyers every day who probably have some sort of claim that would be, something in another context. I would say, well, this is completely solvable, let's fix it.
Paul, I wish we had more time, but we don't, we're out of time. But thank you for coming, we appreciate it. If you can stick around a few minutes.
Sure.